Season 15 of the hit reality competition show, So You Think You Can Dance, kicked off on June 4th. Dancers from all over the country and the world showed up to impress judges Nigel, Mary, and Vanessa. From ballet to tap to jazz to contemporary to ballroom to hip-hop and break dancing, any and all styles of dance are welcome. But if a contestant makes it past level 1 auditions and into the academy, as they call it, they have to be ready to kick it up a notch and show their versatility. They must pick up choreography quickly and perform well in a vastly different style of dance, and many different styles of dance, all with a smile on their face and an effortless ease about them, of course. It's always kind of a bummer when someone who is so good at their style of dance is eliminated because they can't measure up in the other styles. But then again, that is the whole premise of the show. You can't just dance the way you want to dance. You have to dance the way the judges want you to dance, too. From today's passage, you would think that King David would make a pretty good contestant on So You Think You Can Dance, the celebrity biblical season, of course. Because David dances not just once, but twice. Both times he's dancing before the ark, aka the presence of the Lord, and the first time it's a full company number with the entire house of Israel giving it their all, complete with songs and lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. I'm thinking Latin jazz, maybe. The second time King David dances, it's a solo number, and he's scantily clad. So I'm guessing it's ballet or contemporary of some sort. Now, David's dancing has long been a picture of joyous, full heart, mind, body, and soul worship, and rightly so. Given that Baptists love the Bible, I'm not sure where the whole Baptists don't dance thing came from. Because here it is, folks, in the scriptures, David is dancing. When you dance, you lose yourself in the moment, which is the point. To not be focused on yourself, but rather on the other person you're dancing with, or in the case of worship, on God. But in David's case, what happens after each of his dances is far less joyous than the dances themselves. After the first dance, a guy dies, and after the second one, David essentially breaks up with his wife and renders her childless. Sure, there is some celebration and rejoicing about the ark finally making it to Jerusalem, but that genuine worship seems to be overshadowed by some seriously somber stuff. Like the contestants on So You Think You Can Dance, David learns you can't just dance the way you want to dance. Nor can you dance around your faults and mistakes. You have to include everyone in the dance. Most importantly, God. And you have to dance by God's rules. Does David do this? Well, we're going to dig a little deeper and find out. The whole chapter of 2 Samuel 6 is all about how the Ark of the Covenant came to rest in Jerusalem. As you might remember from your childhood Sunday school classes or from the esteemed Professor Indiana Jones, the Ark of the Covenant was a sacred vessel for the ancient Israelites. It is literally where the presence of God is located. And not just the presence of God, but the power of God. Because of this, the ark was treated with reverence and even at times fear, and rightly so. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, we learn that Eli's sons are the ones who carried the Ark of the Covenant into a battle with the Philistines. And in that battle, the Philistines managed to capture the Ark and take it back to their temple. But while the Ark is in their possession, God torments the Philistines, and so they send it back to the Israelites. Similar to a game of hot potato, the Philistines realize that this is not something they wanted in their possession. So the ark is back in the Israelites' possession, and it ends up in Beth Shemesh, where the townsfolk there greet it with great rejoicing. But then something happens, and we're not exactly sure what happened, but some guys look in on the ark, and it incites the wrath of God yet again. And whatever happened, it was bad because 70 people died. Not surprisingly, the survivors in that town said, "We don't want this thing. Where should this ark of God go?" Essentially, the Israelites become so afraid of the ark that they send it away to a place called Kiriath Jearim, which means city of thickets. Maybe they thought they could hide it in the thickets, who knows? But there it is cared for by Eleazar, one of the sons of Amminadab, for nearly 20 years. While that is all going on, what is also going on is that David is consolidating his political power in Jerusalem, and it is now called, literally, the city of David. He's growing ever more powerful as king over Israel, and he wants to make Jerusalem not just the political capital of Israel, but also the religious center. And there is no doubt that David is doing this for religious reasons, but it also seems that, he's got to understand the power dynamics at play here. The power and the esteem that he will garner by bringing the ark into Jerusalem. He knows that this act will seal the deal in terms of his fame and status being greater than that of King Saul's. His motives for power are couched in piety, it seems. In any case, David does decide to bring the ark out of quarantine, and in today's chapter, we read that Eleazar is not mentioned, but two other sons of Amminadab are. So the brother must have passed it off to his other two brothers, Uzzah and Ahio. Now they are responsible for watching over the ark as they transport it to Jerusalem. And here's a very important side note. David orders a new cart to be made for the ark. And this was perhaps his first mistake in this whole ordeal, because the ark was not meant to be put on a cart. It was supposed to be carried by priests on poles. And this was so that the priests could literally feel the weight of God on their shoulders. The only people who had put the ark on a cart before were the Philistines. And we know what kind of luck they had. The second mistake that David made was forgetting the first time to offer a sacrifice. As one scholar put it, they were singing and dancing, but it wasn't really worship, it was really a big racket, because David forgot the key act of worship when it came to the ark: sacrifice. He wanted all the benefits of God's presence, but didn't want to invest in the work of being in God's presence. Back to the story. These two guys, Uzzah and Ahio, were assigned to drive the ark to Jerusalem, and as they're doing so, one of the oxen stumbles, and Uzzah instinctively, we think, puts his hand up to steady the ark, and he's killed on the spot. Why he is killed and not the oxen who stumbled, we don't know. It has something to do with the fact that he touched it. Now, I don't know about you, but this is kind of a troubling incident, isn't it? Wouldn't we all have tried to keep the ark from falling? This was the presence of God, after all. Uzzah's infraction seems like a small one compared to the punishment that he gets. But if we pay attention to the intention of the narrator, we can see that the person writing this story wants to convey something to us about God. And while we may not understand or feel settled about the storyline itself, we can still search for the message that's trying to be communicated. One suggestion some scholars have made is that it's perhaps David's motives for moving the ark that caused this vengeance. Because maybe these motives were more about himself than they were about God. Which is clear in the way that David forgoes the sacred rules of the ark for the speed of getting it to Jerusalem quickly. And thus, those who were a part of a process of moving the ark are the ones who suffered. We know that often the bystanders and the weak people in our society suffer because of the decisions of those who hold power. If you think about it, David actually never recited the rules of the Ark of the Covenant to Uzzah and Achil. These were rules that were given generations before them. They may not have even known that they were not supposed to touch the ark. So, scholars say you can make the argument that Uzzah died at the expense of David's irresponsibility and hasty decision-making. As Rick Chapman said earlier, David wasn't a perfect guy. He made mistakes. In any case, Uzzah dies, and David is angry at God. And he's a little bit afraid of the ark. Who wouldn't be at this point? 70 people died, another person died. So David decides, I'm not going to take this to Jerusalem after all. I'm going to push it off on somebody else. And so he takes it to the home of Obed-Edom. Now, Obed and his family keep it for about 3 months, and things are going really well while he has it. Fame and good fortune arise for that family. And so then David decides, okay, it must be time for the ark to come to Jerusalem. It's garnering some good luck now. So he begins the process of bringing it into the city, and this time David is dancing in an undershirt or underwear. There's no question, I would imagine, that all eyes would have been on David. Here comes into the story his wife, Michal. Now she sees David dancing in his exposed state and becomes angry at his display. And she tells him exactly how she feels, and of course he turns around and tells her exactly how he feels. History has presented Michal as the bad guy or the bad gal in this text because she disdained David's dancing. But I wonder, was she really upset with the idea of dancing before God in worship? Or could she have been upset with the fact that David was dancing around so many issues instead of truly dancing before God? Because if we back up a little bit and listen to Michal's story, we get a different picture of David. Michal is the daughter of King Saul, and she falls in love with David. Twice in the scriptures we're told that she loves David. Not once are we told that David loves her. We don't know that that means that he didn't. It's just not stated. Well, Saul begins to get jealous of David, and he looks for an opportunity to kill him. So he sends them into battle with the Philistines to obtain 100 foreskins of the Philistines and assumes that as David does this, he'll probably be killed and there'll be no threat to the crown. Well, Michal shows her love for her husband, for David, over and against her father, Saul, by helping David escape her dad's wrath. She clearly loves him. So why is she so upset about the dancing? Well, she has a bit more to be upset about, as it turns out. One of the characteristics of Saul's kingship was modesty and humility, and David's dance really flies in the face of that. And this was her father's kingship, of course. Also, David has taken multiple wives and concubines since his marriage to Michal, and essentially has spent little to no time with her up until this point. So we can imagine there's some jealousy going on here too. If you go back and read this exchange, the whole argument between David and Michal sounds like a Phil Donahue middle-of-the-day talk show scenario. I mean, it's really quite volatile. But the key verse is the last one. Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children until her death. What that means is that Saul's bloodline essentially stopped. There could be no threat to David's crown because Saul would have no heirs. That's quite a response from David. And in this story, I think we can really see how complex of a guy King David was. Everything David did, as you said, Rick, was big and loud. He was all in. He was held in infamy as the greatest king Israel ever had. And he gave us these amazing psalms of praise and lament and this example of dancing and full-body worship before God. But we have to wonder at times, did he forget where he came from? Did he forget that he was once a shepherd watching over his sheep? You see, David thinks he can dance, and he can, but who is he dancing for? God and the Israelite people? Or is it for himself and his own power? We don't know. We'll never know. But there are enough hints in the scripture to tell us that there's a lot going on in this text. And I think the lesson for us is that, like David, we too need to have these times of gut check, if you will, honest evaluation with ourselves about our intentions and our motives and the consequences, intended and unintended, of our actions. David is a great guy who does wonderful things, but he is also a human, and he does a lot of hurtful things too. We learn from this text that no person, regardless of his or her position or power or title, is immune to accountability for our actions. Just because a person does some good doesn't mean they cannot also do some bad. And we have to be able to see that in ourselves and hold one another to account when we see the power of one or a few inflicting pain on many. And this gets complicated, doesn't it? Because sometimes an action can be both good and bad at the same time. On a small scale, let's think about our recent decision, the survey about our worship time, right? 9:30 or 10:30, which one is better? Is there a good choice or a bad choice? Well, some of you have opinions on this, I know. But really, both are good choices. Neither's a bad choice. It's based on preference and opinion and your own life and schedule. But sometimes decisions are good for some and bad for others, and it's not about preference or opinion. It's because the good is based on power and privilege, not on justice and equality. History and current events show us that a policy can serve the needs of some while it fails to serve the needs of others. And when that happens, we have to ask ourselves, whose needs are greater? This is a tough question. But the Gospels give us a measure as to whose needs we are to lift up. Jesus and himself preached it in his first sermon. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim God's favor for all. So when it becomes a question as to who we should consider first, which needs we should look at, the Bible, the Gospels, are quite clear. It is the needs of the poor, the immigrant, the refugee, the outsider, the hungry, the thirsty, the minority. Time and time again, Jesus was concerned with those outside of the circle of power. You see, it's not David's dancing that's the issue. It's his intention and motive. Because David did help a lot of people. He distributed food to the people of Israel, those raisin cakes and meat. But he also cost a man his life and his wife's love and family. Whenever we, as Christians, make a decision or support an action or position, like David, I think it is our call to be asking, who could this be harming? Because the truth is, we'll naturally ask, who does this help? And often the ones it helps include us, right? Because we vote for things and we support things that help us. But if we're not asking, who will this harm, who will ask that? Is that not Christ's call for our lives? Because the only way any dance can truly be for God is if it is also equally for the people of God. I wonder if David had thought things through a bit more the first time around, that the implications of his actions might have been a bit different. Would his dance have lasted a bit longer the first time with the whole company that was with him? And would there have been more joy and more winners than just David himself? In an interview after he won season 11 of So You Think You Can Dance, fan favorite Ricky Ubeda was asked, what one piece of feedback from the judges would he remember? And this is what he said. I remember when I did my duet with Jamie in the top 8, and Nigel was floored by the way that I could put my technique in the background and allow it to take a back seat to the piece of music and what it means. It becomes artistry when it's about the story of the dance and not the talent of the dancer, he said. That's something that I try to do, so I'm glad that Nigel noticed it. I love that. It becomes artistry when it's about the story of the dance, capital D, and not about the talent of the dancer. The same could be said for our faith, too. What story, what dance are we telling by our words and actions? Is it a dance that includes everyone? Is it a story that minimizes harm and maximizes help? I wonder, do you think you can dance? I saw you shake your head no, Larry. I think you can dance. More importantly, God knows you can. So what are you waiting for? Grab a partner and dance your heart out, because there are hearts around the world that are depending on you. Amen.